in 2018, Clean Air Minnesota engaged in strategic planning. And during that strategic planning, one of the major outcomes that was realized was that there needed to be greater community input and outreach in the projects that CAM was engaged in. So the only other thing I'll say before we dive right in is a little bit of logistics. For questions, please post them in the chat. That way we're going to try and run straight through the presentations, and then after our 3 presentations, we'll be having a chance for questions and some discussion. So with that being said, I would like to introduce for our first presentation, Mariah Quick and Shannon Conk. Shannon Conk is a community engagement coordinator with Ramsey, Washington Recycling and Energy, and Mariah Quick is a health educator with Ramsey County, and they will be speaking on how Ramsey County has been embedding community engagement into project development. And Shannon and Mariah, you should be able to screen share. Let me know if you have any problems with that.
Awesome, thank you. I just realized I've never actually screen shared doing Zoom before, so we'll see what happens. Does that look normal to anyone? Okay, great. So I'm Mariah Quick. I work for Ramsey County, and I'm here with Shannon Conk. And today we're going to be talking about Ramsey County and the R&E Center's approach to community engagement. And then Shannon's going to get into a little bit about some of the activities that we're doing for a current project. So for Ramsey County, everything that we do has some element of community engagement to it. And because of that, we've developed our own kind of action planning guide for figuring out how we're going to do community engagement. There are 4 steps in the planning process that I'm going to go over. But first, I just kind of want to acknowledge that community engagement is something that doesn't happen just when you have a project. It should be more of a proactive approach and ongoing effort. And then that way, when you are asking people for feedback or interacting with residents or whomever you're doing the engagement with, it doesn't feel like it's coming out of nowhere. You have a relationship established already, and I think that will really help make community engagement more successful. So the first step is figuring out if there is even a need for community engagement, considering does this project have public-facing impacts? Can the community really change anything about the project outcomes by giving their feedback? And do you have enough time and resources to do a good job and have meaningful engagement? If the answer is yes, then we move on to step 2, which is figuring out who to engage, thinking about who the stakeholders are in the community that we're wanting to work with. Thinking about their connections to the community, connections to perhaps stakeholders at Ramsey County, different decision makers, and then do they have any current awareness or interest in what we're working on? So that will help figure out how much background education we need to do before we can do some of the actual engaging part. So once we figured out our time, our resources, staffing, and who we're targeting with the community engagement, the next step is to figure out the actual community engagement strategy. And there are a lot of different levels of public participation, from something like creating a fact sheet, that would be more on like the inform level, all the way to empowering people, where the community really has the final say. And an example of that would be an election. A lot of what we do in Ramsey County hovers around that consult involve stage, which is doing like surveys or hosting focus groups. Of course, we do a lot of informing with our mailings and our website. What's really important with whatever you decide to do is to be transparent with the community about how their input is going to shape the project you're working on. You don't want people to think they have complete control and then they're going to be upset when you don't take all of their suggestions. But you also don't want people to think there's no point in participating, so they aren't even going to give you good feedback. The other thing I think is really important in this stage is to think about what barriers there might be to have people participate. An example of this would be if you're hosting something in person, like a town hall or some kind of focus group, and you know that transportation might be an issue for people, you could be proactive in reducing that barrier by offering like metro transit passes or maybe partnering with Uber or Lyft. You could also do like a virtual option, and that way it can reduce the stress on participants and actually make the community engagement more successful. So the final step in the planning process for us is figuring out how we're going to know that we were successful. And thinking about what success looks like before you do any engaging is super helpful in the long run, because it kind of stinks after you do something and then you're like, I wish I would have. So thinking about how you're going to measure outputs, like counting people that you engage with while you're tabling or the number of surveys you collect, and then thinking about short-term outcomes. This could be something like for Ramsey County at our Yardway site, increase in the number of people who go to our food scraps location or our Yardway sites. So those are the 4 steps that Ramsey County uses for planning community engagement. And I'm going to pass it over to Shannon to talk about the R&E Center.
Thanks, Mariah. So again, I'm Shannon Conk. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for Ramsey Washington Recycling and Energy, which I'll just refer to as R&E. And I'll just dive into our approach to community engagement. So R&E is a joint powers authority between Ramsey and Washington County. So we collaborate with staff from both counties or community engagement staff from both counties. And then we also have access to resources and tools of both counties. For our community engagement approach, previously we had kind of a smaller staff, and so our engagement approach was much more on a project by project basis. And we've increased our staff capacity and are currently working on ways to sort of integrate community engagement into all aspects of our work. So like Mariah said, our work is more, our community engagement approach in that way can be more proactive rather than reacting on a project by project basis. And then you can go ahead and jump ahead. Yep, so in terms of the business pollution prevention program and community engagement, this is really a collaboration between three groups: EI, R&E, and Ramsey County. And each group has different community engagement responsibilities at different times as the program evolves. The initial focus has been on business associations and local chambers. And we've actually used the Partnership on Waste and Energy's Biz Partners program as a model and starting point for making connections with business groups who can really assist in building awareness of the BPP opportunity and businesses that will benefit from it. We also, with EI, EI brings in their business organization connections, which is really helpful as well. And, we're looking to those groups to provide feedback on program design and relevance of the program over time. COVID providing significant challenges. We all know that COVID's been a challenge for all of us in so many different ways, but in terms of community engagement, we really prioritize in-person relationship building. So there's certainly some limitations around that. So just sort of kind of knowing that there's a slower pace of developing some of the relationships that we're working on and just being adaptable with that. In terms of future expansion of engagement with this project, we're looking at opportunities to build on business group engagement and broaden the types of groups that can be engaged in the community. And then opportunities to do deeper kinds of engagement. So, Mariah kind of showed us that spectrum of engagement. So moving from maybe inform to consult or higher levels of engagement in the community. And then also looking at evolving metrics for the effectiveness of our engagement. This program really is going to be evolving over time, and we want to make sure that the way that we're measuring our engagement evolves with it. And Mariah, you can jump ahead. And then I just wanted to throw in a few sort of quick notes about community engagement and some of the missteps that we can sometimes make when we start doing this work. One of the things I really want to hit home on is that community members, and whether that's a resident or a business, they're really the experts of their lives and of their business and of their communities. So when we go into a community looking to do community engagement, sort of approaching people and engaging people with humility, and really knowing that relationship building is absolutely essential in effective community engagement. And knowing that people might not always be open to that relationship right away. And part of that is understanding some of the dynamics that might exist between, say, like for us, a government, government to business, or maybe like academia to community, kind of understanding some of the current and historic dynamics around power and just some of the ways that community engagement hasn't always worked. And I guess when we talk about intent versus impact with community engagement, you might have a really great idea for community engagement and think that it will be really beneficial to the community. And sometimes those don't always kind of pan out the way that we hope. And in cases can be, the impact of those programs or projects can actually be harmful to the community and sort of continue some of the strained power dynamics between, businesses or government and businesses, or academia and communities. So just being really aware of some of those dynamics that are at play. And then finally, so, we compensate people for, different types of consulting, and we consider community expertise no differently. So just really, when possible, trying to compensate people, residents, for their expertise, just knowing, again, that they're the experts of the community. That's all I have. I will pass it back to John, to the next speaker.
Thank you, Shannon and Mariah, for your presentation. Like I said, for the folks who have joined us a little later, we're going to go straight through presentations and then have time for questions for all three of our 4 presenters and 3 presentations. And that'll come at the end. Our next presenter is Monica Vidali. Monica is an environmental research scientist with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And Monica will be speaking on community engagement around research that the MPCA has been conducting with sensor placement. Gathering sensor data is a critical step in developing projects, and it's also a highly visible part of air emissions reduction work. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Monica.
All right, so this is a project that we had started once we got the LCCMR grant back in 2017. And there are various angles to this project, but today I'm going to just focus on the kind of community engagement we had done for getting locations where to place the sensors, and then after that, what we have done to continue the engagement. So, I mean, as an agency, our priority is to work on facility projects. My job in particular is to do the risk assessments for facilities that come up for permits or EWs or EISs. And based on all of the different projects, we kind of know that the Minneapolis, especially north, south, there are certain pockets where pollution has always been an issue. And we don't have enough monitoring to kind of answer air quality questions. So with the advent of newer technology and being more affordable and being able to place them wherever we can, we thought we'd explore this to kind of see if we can get any understanding of what the neighborhood urban air quality differences look like. So we applied for the LCCMR grant, and then we did get it. So that's kind of how the project started. So even before kind of deciding where to put it, we have all of these metrics, the EJ metrics, which show that there are disproportionately impacted areas even within Minneapolis and St. Paul. And then we have these asthma hospitalization maps that MDH puts up every 5 years on their website. Again, we can see at the zip code level, there are definitely differences in that. So based on all of that, we decided to go ahead and start this project. And the biggest challenge for us was to see where to put these locations. We did know that based on the equipment that we had chosen, we were able to put them up on poles and things like that. But then I don't live in Minneapolis or St. Paul, so I don't really know. I mean, I wouldn't be the best person to randomly pick stuff. So we started out with doing a lot of community engagement. So we went out to neighborhood groups whenever they had their monthly meetings to kind of explain what the project was and to see if we can get support. We did that even, just with random residents. We had printed out fact sheets about what we wanted to do and things like that. We published a lot in local newspapers once we had fixed like dates. So when we wanted to go out and do like open house style of presentation for the initial meetings, we used all of our Gov delivery lists that we had. We did a lot of posting on Facebook and Twitter. I even did a story on NPR, which was aired before we started this study. We do have several articles on the Star Tribune as well. We also started a MPCA project webpage just to have an internal and external facing page where we could just put what the project updates were and dates and times, meeting times and things like that. So based on all of that, we decided, let's just go ahead. What we did not get input was on what we wanted to monitor, but based on our previous agency's work, this set of gases and PM was what we thought would be the most relevant. So what the project was to put out 50 air quality monitors, at least one in each zip code and in both Minneapolis and St. Paul. What we knew was that they're going to be on poles because that's kind of, you can find them everywhere is what we assumed. And then the monitoring will be conducted for 2 years. So the picture you see there is the very first meeting that we had in Miriam Park Library in St. Paul. So what we did was we went out to individual communities, North Minneapolis, South Minneapolis, and we talked to whoever would come to meet us from that community, kind of explaining these very things and asking them where they would like to see the monitors go up. So we had given them, some criteria, like it's got to be in a really dense neighborhood, near schools, daycares, and like not in your backyard kind of a thing. If there are any parks or outdoor recreation places where people tend to spend a lot of time, we'd like to see them there. So we'd taken these kind of blown out maps, and then we had these stickers there. So after giving them a little presentation, then I would just invite people to come up to the board and stick a dot on where they wanted to see the monitors go up. We had done this for St. Paul separately, 1 or 2 meetings in North Minneapolis and 2 meetings in South Minneapolis. So we went out, not just one big meeting for everybody, but to their communities to seek input from them separately. And also we thought they would give in different days and times to give everybody a chance to at least come and attend it. So this is kind of what we got. All the dots are stickers that people just walked up to the board and they just put it there. Then I consolidated all of them. We had over 100 different locations. So all the little yellow triangles are where people wanted them. And then the green dots are where we thought, based on the density of input and the availability of Excel polls, we thought that would kind of be the best option. And this is kind of the map where they are currently placed. There are some green dots with a purple behind them, and those are co-located sites. So we have both MPCA monitors as well as the AQ mesh monitors in those locations. So in Minneapolis, we ended up putting them on Excel street poles, the wooden poles on streets. But in St. Paul, we realized that they don't have those kind of street poles anymore. So we decided to work with the St. Paul Public School District, and we just knocked out schools and then just put them in the parking lots of schools, which seemed to work out really well. So some project updates so far. The phase 1 was way back in spring. Before we, that was kind of when we started the engagement and we knew where we wanted to put the pods. We thought we'd just do like a baseline to see where the sensors were, and we did that on our own. And in the meantime, we also conducted the community meetings to get feedback. And then we were able to finalize the locations. And last summer, all the pods were out. We have 4 pods that are kind of spare just in case something happens to swap them around. And late last year, all the way through Feb of this year, we did a second round of community meetings where we went back to the exact same communities, North, South Minneapolis, and St. Paul, and talked to them about the 8 to 12 months of data that we had. So it was not, again, just presenting them with all the data, but if you would go to St. Paul, then I would pull up the zip code that I was presenting in and kind of show results compared to that, to the rest of the project, how it's doing, just to make it a little more interesting for people who are attending. I'm sure they'll have more interest in their neighborhood versus just, listening to the whole study results. So ultimately, what we do want to get is to help kind of inform citizens, work with schools and sports coaches to kind of tie what we're seeing in terms of air quality trends and things like that with AQI to maybe change some or get some behavioral changes. None of our pods are on freeways and things like that. So it would be kind of difficult to get any inference on traffic patterns and stuff like that. These are all our partners, just to thank all of them. I think that's about what I have. But I also would like to just say that we had, I think, a much easier time in Minneapolis because they seem to be much more organized in terms of neighborhoods, or at least that data is much more easily available, like who to contact, the neighborhood groups and things like that. In St. Paul, it was really difficult because it's kind of a little different from how Minneapolis is set up. So they're divided into districts and not like neighborhood groups. I wish I had met somebody like Shannon and Mariah who could have helped me connect more to the community. I still feel like we are not as connected in St. Paul as we are in Minneapolis, but hopefully we can improve a little more on that to make projects like this a little more meaningful to the communities. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. We have one more presentation. Our final presentation is from Brandy Toft, who's the Environmental Deputy Director with Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe. And Brandy is going to be speaking on a little higher level of community engagement and presenting on how agency and organizations can approach partnerships with tribal governments to build successful projects and relationships. Brandy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Bill. This is great. And this was a hard one for me in a way. Weird enough to say, I really struggled with what to bring forward to you. So first off, I don't have a PowerPoint. What I do want is to engage with you. So those who can, please turn on your cameras so I'm not talking to a black screen. Hi, Megan. Thank you for having your video on. I'd really like to see you. I'd like to see your reactions, and this is how you create that engagement. So thank you everyone for doing that. All right, so this is my take only, right? I think that's what I have to preface this with, and that starting off, building partnerships of any kind with any organization takes time, effort, and energy. And there's a little difference of that effort and energy within working with tribal governments. They're not an organization. They are not a group. They are a tribal government. They're sovereign nations within that. And that takes a little understanding to wrap your head around too, in that we have different ways of working and different opportunities that come to us. So want to make sure that gets there. And I'll just start off with one of the first things to do is we do have a organization we call MINTEC, Minnesota Tribal Environmental Council or Committee. And it's just a bunch of us environmental folks, staff from the tribes that get together every so often. It's usually quarterly, but during the pandemic, it's been monthly. We just talk about different environmental issues. And that's an opportunity for you to present. I know EI has presented there before on different opportunities or projects that could come about. So I'll put that link to the website that we just are unveiling in the chat box after my presentation. This is not a sales pitch. You are not trying to sell us something. You try to sell us something, we're going to go like this. I think you are just big brother or whatever like that, and it's not going to work. So you really need to work on listening, you know, listening to what the tribes are saying, everything like that, but also how in that listening, how can this be a beneficial relationship? You know, what can you offer, and thinking outside the box, because tribes really have some unique opportunities to do things a little different than normal, or what you perceive as normal, we perceive as quite normal for us, but outside the box for you. So there's some really cool opportunities we can provide, and we're great partners. Build upon that success, just build up momentum, and I'll give a really good example of that at the end of the presentation. One thing you can really do is offer to share resources. Is that technical resources? Is that staff? What is that you can help share to propel the project you're proposing or the idea you're proposing forward? Most of the time, we're 1.5 person shops, and we just don't have the time frame, but we think it's a great idea. We just don't have that ability to move it forward. So any assistance like that, which could cost you nothing, would be really beneficial. I spoke with another tribal rep on this, and we really want to say that tribes are really a tight-knit community. Everybody knows everybody. It's like a small town in a way, only much larger. Like, just for an example, Leech Lake is the size of Rhode Island within Minnesota. There's 11 tribes in Minnesota, and they're all uniquely different. They all have different priorities. They all have different things they're going for, or the abilities they have at the moment. They may be working on those different resources or abilities, and your project could propel them forward or not. So I've already kind of talked about this a little bit, but the tribes are governments and not locals, not agencies. Treat them with respect. I think that's the most thing is ignorance is allowable if you're just uneducated about it and you allow for that education to come. Ignorance is bad when you know better and you still keep treating it that way. So we understand there are going to be learning curves. We are patient with people in that respect. But if you don't get it after the first couple corrections, again, the screen's going to come down. You are not our partner. Don't assume. Always ask. I mean, these are kind of normal things you should do, but they're very critical. You know, even do a little bit of research before you go in with that tribe, because you may be going down to one of the Sioux communities down in Dakota Sioux communities down south, and then you try to do the same thing up at, say, Fond du Lac. I see Joy's on. Fond du Lac or whatever, and it's different. There's different cultural values. There's different ways of doing things, and you really need to do some homework on that. So don't always assume, and don't always assume Wikipedia is correct, or Google for that matter. One person does not speak for all. I do not speak for everyone. I barely speak for my own reservation I represent. I am not a tribal member, and you have to be cognizant of that too. Don't assume people are tribal or non-tribal. That is the quickest way to get yourself in trouble. But just understand that we are trying to represent and not speaking for the tribe. We are not the end sayers. The tribal council is the end sayer. Tribes are quiet. On general, tribes are quiet. They listen. They sit there and you think they're doodling or they're ignoring you or whatnot, but they're quiet. They are listening, they're internalizing, and you could get fidgety and you just kind of sitting there like this and you're just kind of waiting, and that is disrespectful. When they are sharing something with you and they're pausing a lot, they're sharing a story or an insight with you, and that should be almost, I feel, and this is my words only, I feel that's more of an honor, that they are taking their time to share something with you, a piece of them, a piece of their wisdom, and that just be there, be there and reflect it. Even if you don't understand it, that's okay. There's ways that you also might come to you, or you can ask someone afterwards, or you could ask about it at the end. There's ways to go about that. So just be courteous and listen. I think that's the hardest thing. It was hard for me first coming in too. I'm like, okay, let's go. And no, they're a quieter bunch. Not all tribes have the same issues. And I know I've said this a little bit, but this needs to be brought up again, is like, say take two big topics, two polarizing topics, is pipelines and mining. Not all tribes agree on how to deal with them, if they're pro or against, if they're in the middle, or what it is. And don't get caught up in the tribal politics. Well, so-and-so is for this, and so-and-so is this. You know, where do you guys stand? That's none of your business. That's internal politics and internal cultural needs that are there. So just understand that not all things are the same across the 11 tribes. And then you get the 547 tribes across the nation, and you think you got a mess. There's a big mess of politics. Sometimes tribes don't work well with each other. In Minnesota, we pretty much work really well with each other. So we talk a lot. So be careful that you say something to Joy. You bet Joy and I are going to be on the phone call about a half an hour later. Like, what did you think of that guy? Man, was he blah, blah, blah. Be aware that if you're a certain way with one tribe and a certain way with another, we're going to call your bluff. We're going to understand that. I've already kind of said this, that we have opportunities to do things enabled by others. And I wish I came up with some great examples and was so on top of my game, but I'm not. I'm off the cuff here today. One thing I found that's really important is whenever you're working on a project, make sure you're working with the end project or end goal in mind, and who's going to own that information at the end. Who's going to own the data? Who's going to own the project? Is it going to be a combined? I think that's really important to discuss right up front, because there's been so many issues with tribes and lack of transparency in the past, that being more transparent and very, very open, and just that's going to breed a lot of trust, and that's really what you're wanting. So wrapping up, I hope this was informational, but wrapping up, I just want to give an example, and I can only give an example from myself, that back in 2006, I called up this guy named Bill, and out of the blue, and just said, dude, I need someone to come talk to me about diesel work to a grassroots community thing we're doing. And Bill happened to work with EI, and then it was MEI, right? And ever since then, we have had this beautiful relationships. I suspect I'll still be working with EI well into the future here. So thank you for your time. Thank you for those who engaged with me. I appreciate you turning on your cameras, and thanks so much.
Thank you, Brandy. And thank you for shifting the focus from presentations to a more collaborative, especially as we're talking about community engagement. I think it's important to have both of those pieces represented. So thank you for that.
If you guys don't mind, I'd like to jump in real quick and just add something from a tribal point of view. Brandy kind of touched on it, but I was involved in a community training that the Pollution Control Agency did about a week ago, along with EPA and communities and facilities. And one of the issues we talked about was trust. And it was during somebody's presentation, and we were all typing like mad. What does trust mean to you? And there were some really, really interesting things that were shared. And two that really struck me were honesty and vulnerability. And I find that that's so true, that I work with a number of agencies, as Brandy does. And some of the best relationships I've had are with people who will just honestly say, I'm sorry, but we're not going to do that. We're not going to give you that. And here's why. And I appreciate their honesty, and we can move on from there. And I've heard a time or two that was a political decision, and that's what it's going to be. And I appreciate the honesty and the vulnerability that that shows. And I would very much like to echo what Brandy said about just being quiet while tribal folks are absorbing and listening, and that sometimes you will get questions that aren't really pertinent, or you don't think they're pertinent to what you're discussing, but they're part of the big picture. And our tribal council does this to me all the time. I'll go in to present on something and they'll ask me about something I was not anticipating, and just go with it. It's part of their decision making. They're trying to get a big picture.
Thank you, Joy.
Thanks for letting me add those comments.
Oh no, that's always valuable.
Absolutely, thank you. So we have about 10 minutes for questions from anyone for any of our presenters. I know that may not seem like a long time, but you know, as my background in music tells me, anytime you give a concert, you want to leave them wanting more. So we hope that it'll be in a little bit of an impetus to join us again for another webinar. It looks like, so again, for some of the folks who joined a little later after I'd given an introduction, if you can put your questions into the chat, that's probably the easiest way to queue things up and just keep us moving quickly. So with that, it looks like Lisa had a question for Shannon and Mariah about what type of research do Ramsey County staff do to learn about specific communities within the county?
I think that's a great question. And Shannon and I were trying to figure out like what's the most simplest way to answer it. We do a couple different strategies. One, Ramsey County has existed for a long time, so there is historical relationships. So when someone new is onboarded, you know, reaching out to staff that have been there for a while to just get a feel of what's going on. But we also work very closely with different cultural consultants and liaisons. And so trusting their expertise, kind of like what Shannon was saying, if people know their own lived experience best. And so just showing up and listening and having conversations. But we do have people that we like contract with that are our cultural consultants for different communities. And then something I've been doing in my role as a health educator is just attending things like this, so showing up at webinars, showing up at meetings, going to things that are in the community, and not having anything to present, but just saying I'm here to learn. And then later down the road, sharing things that might be relevant to that community group. So not even necessarily Ramsey County stuff, but if I hear about, like for example, over the summer, there's been a lot of food shelf initiatives. So sharing that with different communities that I think could share it with their residents is a good way to build those initial relationships.
Yeah, and I can add to a way that is helpful for me to think about it is there's sort of, we have our internal resources. So like Mariah said, some of the information that is just accumulated with different staff that have worked, you know, and I think when we're in environmental health, but we collaborate a lot with people across different departments. So maybe we don't have a great handle on, you know, what is happening in a certain community, but maybe someone from another department does. So having access to folks across different departments. So thinking about internal relationships and internal resources and tools that we have, and then sort of external. So that'd be like when Mariah was talking about, you know, going out and making connections with different community organizations and kind of just like trying to do a lot of learning in that setting. And then also, yeah, really just re-emphasizing the cultural consultants have been just so helpful. And it, you know, we have to understand our limitations in going into community and want to be respectful, and using the cultural or working with cultural consultants is a really great way to both be able to engage with those communities and then also kind of compensating folks for that cultural expertise.
Thank you both. So I have a timely question for any of our presenters. And I think this is, I mean, it's a lived experience. There's a reason that we're online right now, and it's because we're in the midst of a pandemic. And I am curious that in the last 6 months, as COVID has been a big part of all of our lives, are there any initial lessons or takeaways that you have for community outreach and engagement in this more digitally based time?
I can give a stab at this. This is very difficult for tribes. We're very rural. We have 17 different communities across the reservation and limited internet. Broadband is not up here as prevalent as it is down in more larger cities, if not the Twin Cities. And there's a difficulty in sharing information right now. We're still in phase 1. You know, we're still phase 1. We're not even open. So even our main offices. So Facebook has been something we've been using, but we haven't been working on a lot of stuff during this COVID. We're more worried about, as we refer to, the beans, bullets, and band-aids, you know, keeping people safe, secure, and then the projects will come later.
Other thoughts from presenters on that one, or we can keep moving?
I can jump in and just speak really briefly to a project that Mariah and I are working on right now, and Mariah just take over whenever it sounds right. But, you know, I think sort of just when the pandemic started, I think we all just really didn't know what was possible within the confines of being safe and doing anything in person. And I think we still have to be really, really careful about what we're doing and safety protocols. But I know with one of the projects that we're working on, the residents that we're really trying to engage with, we know there's language barriers, there's technology accessibility barriers, there's a lot of things that maybe in the time of a pandemic, we're really just playing it safe and doing internet, sort of like social media posts or a postcard mailer, things that they'll need that technology in order to access. We're just not going to really engage with a big part of the population. So we've, I guess, found that taking advantage of any sort of in-person opportunity when it is possible and is safe is something we really tried to have happen this fall. And there's now, you know, as we move into winter, there's a seasonal limitation here in Minnesota where with this project, we were like, okay, we do want to do some in-person work if it's safe. And we found that we could do it safely, but knowing that, you know, fall, we just have like a month or two left to get this done. And now we move into winter, we're sort of going to have to shift again. So if we're thinking about the pandemic long-term, you know, what does this winter look like compared to next summer? And you know, it's just so hard to say what anything will look like, but kind of taking advantage of some of those outdoor opportunities. Mariah, I don't know if there's anything.
Yeah, I'll just add that Shannon and I haven't planned anything where we are asking people to gather. We're more meeting people where they're already at. So for one of our projects, we're trying to get a sense of what the community thinks about a new community center that we're working on. And so we tried a couple different things, including reaching out to virtual meetings that are already happening with neighborhood organizations, but we went to the community garden and just talked to people that were there. We went outside of a store in the neighborhood, and as people were coming in, we said, you know, if you feel comfortable and have time, we can offer you a coupon to the store if you have some time to talk to us about this new project. And that way we weren't asking people to, you know, come all together in one spot and maybe create an unsafe situation, but people are already going to the store in the Twin Cities. They're tending to their garden. And so we offered masks to everyone, even if they already had one on. We were just giving them out like candy, and we both were wearing masks, and we had hand sanitizer, and we did the survey on, it's online, but Shannon and I each had our own device. And so we didn't ask people to like fill it out themselves or hand out a device to multiple people. We kept it in our hands and just verbally asked the questions. And to kind of increase the accessibility, we also had a translator, which I think was a huge thing for building trust in this community and also just making it easier on everyone. So there are still some anxieties about that kind of interaction, but I think that, you know, with every single thing Shannon and I are doing, we're just having to re-strategize, especially going into winter, because we just don't know what's coming next.
Thank you. I have one final quick question that kind of goes along with that in this digital world. Monica, this question is going to be for you. You had mentioned that when you did outreach, in addition to all of the meetings that were occurring in person, you reached out to communities on Facebook, Twitter, mailers, all of those kinds of pieces. I'm wondering if you have any sense of if any of those pieces of technology or methods of social media were more successful than others in reaching communities.
Yeah, I do think that the local newspaper ads did reach quite a few people. Jenny Lansing had helped out with this, and she had also printed out little pamphlets that were randomly given out in mail. So those kind of things did help. For Facebook, it was mostly whoever liked our MPCA page. It would go out just to those people. I'm not sure if that was reach that we were targeting in Minneapolis and St. Paul. But yeah, the local newspaper ads and the Star Tribune kind of advertising the project definitely did have an effect. In the very first meeting, I think we kind of slightly wanted to get an idea. Did you guys, I mean, how did you hear about this meeting? And that's some of the things that we heard.
Excellent, thank you. With that, I think in the interest of time, we're coming right up on 10 o'clock. I want to thank everyone for joining us for our second webinar. I would especially like to thank our 4 presenters for giving their time today to speak to community input and outreach and engagement as it pertains to their positions with their organizations and in Brandy's case with tribal government. So thank you so much. We did record the webinar today. We will be posting that in the near future. For if you know someone who would find this of interest, we'll have that announcement come up through our social media and also on our website. And I hope that this, for those of us who weren't able to join us on the first one, primed you to want to come to another CAM webinar. So with that, thank you so much. Have a great Wednesday and a great last day of September.
Thank you all.